Last time on Subspace Chronicles, Kim thought the nightmare was finally over. But after wiping out an entire wyvern army, one thing didn't add up. The black-scaled monster was still alive. He could feel it watching, waiting. And when Yong-Su rolled those decoy cars through the portal boom, that shadow from hell moved. It wasn't gone. It was hunting them. Bullets, grenades, even explosions, nothing touched it. That thing just stared straight into the portal like it knew who Kim was. But here's the twist: Kim wasn't done. He leveled up his subspace, forged weapons powerful enough to shatter cities, and blasted through barricades like they were paper. And just when you thought it couldn't get crazier, he finds his long-lost sister. Alive and a healer. Now Jean, the mind controller, rules the starving survivors, and Kim's about to turn that whole power game upside down with unlimited food and firepower. If you missed how we got here or want to watch the full previous parts, all the links are in the description below. Trust me, you don't want to skip this one. Elsewhere, Jean's son Hack receives an urgent report about Jai's younger brother bringing in an enormous stockpile of food, but he remains unimpressed. The messenger insists the quantity is unusually vast, yet Jean dismisses it. With only 2 people arriving in a single jeep, he doubts they could truly transport such an amount. Eventually, he reasons, their supplies will be stolen, and once they are left with nothing, they will be forced to beg for rations like the rest. In Jean's mind, their generosity is foolish. They should have hidden their provisions, rationing them carefully instead of distributing them so freely. Still, this very recklessness could make them easier to manipulate. The messenger presses on, revealing that the newcomers had provided more food than the entire hospital had managed to gather to date. At this, Jean's composure falters. A chill runs down his spine. The sheer volume was impossible. 2 individuals could not possibly gather so much on their own. The hospital's own stash, collected by a full scouting team, had barely managed to fill a single truck. Suspicion takes root. Jean speculates that the newcomers must possess some kind of ability, perhaps duplicating objects or manipulating their size. Whatever the case, their provisions clearly stem from an awakened power, and Jean concludes that they must be recruited. Preparing his signature drug, Jean summons his strongest subordinate, Sun Haingu, and assigns him a mission to lure Jai's younger brother into addiction. If the plan failed, they could simply kill the boy. There was also the driver to consider. Late at night, Yang Hyan distributed food among the hospital residents while scanning the crowd for someone in particular. He believed that finding this individual would make everything far easier. Earlier, he had shared his plan to neutralize all of Jin Seung-Hak's weapons. The strategy was simple: discard the poisoned food and replace it with fresh supplies, subdue the addicted ability users, and finally deal with Jin Hak, who posed no combat threat at all. Yang Hyan worked to gather as much information as Ju Hun had managed to collect. Most of the abilities possessed by the addicted users were insignificant. One person could reseal cans, another could automatically wash clothes. Very few awakened abilities were suited for combat. There was, however, one notable exception inside the hospital: Sun Hyungu. His mere presence was intimidating. After the world collapsed, Hyungu had traveled from Iljiro to Gangnam, determined to reach his mother in the hospital. Ju Hyan knew little about Hyungu's ability, other than the fact that he was unnaturally strong. Hyungu's massive frame was impossible to overlook, and the car wall protecting everyone had been built by his own hands. Now, that giant of a man stood before Yang Hyan for a private discussion. Despite feeling nervous, Yang Hyan welcomed the opportunity. There was unfinished business between them. Hyungu, however, couldn't imagine what sort of business the younger man had in mind. Still, it didn't matter anymore. The two stepped outside toward the very wall that had once kept them safe. Calmly, Hyungu presented Yang Hyan with 2 choices: drink the medicine willingly or face a painful death. He warned against fleeing, calling it a futile effort. It was clear why Hyungu had chosen such a secluded location for their meeting. But Yang Hyan had no intention of running. He knew escape was impossible. Instead, he unveiled a hidden third option, trapping Sun Hyungu where he stood. Enraged by such defiance, Hyungu lunged forward, reaching to crush the young man with his bare hands. Before he could, his fingers struck an invisible barrier. Yang Hyan had vanished, leaving behind only a strange portal to the logistics center. Hyungu couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. By the time he noticed the drone hovering in front of him, it was already too late. A professional-grade, high-speed bowling ball slammed into his stomach, knocking the wind from him. Yang Hyan briefly wondered if 90 kilometers per hour was excessive, but dismissed the thought mercy wasn't an option. Another strike followed, this time aimed at Hyungu's right leg. The blow left the towering man groaning, unable to move properly. When he demanded to know what ability Yang Hyan was using, the young man answered not with words, but with action, launching a heavy barbell plate to the ground. Immobilized, Hyungu was warned to stay put. Even slowed, the plates carried enough weight to break bones or take lives. But Hyungu was not one to remain passive. He charged at one of the stacks and gripped it tightly, much to Yang Hyan's surprise. With brute strength, he began lifting the stack, disrupting the carefully laid trap. Yet, while Hyungu struggled with the weight, he unknowingly triggered the true mechanism of Yang Hyan's prison. The younger man apologized for the cramped accommodations, promising to release him once the ordeal was finished. For now, Hyungu would have to endure the heaviest cell ever devised. Though anxious he may have injured the man seriously, Yang Hyan was relieved to see his opponent's resilience. Back inside, Nurse Julian hurriedly let her brother in. She had heard the noise outside and feared he had clashed with the muzzle-bound Hyungu. Yang Hyan casually confirmed her suspicions, as if nothing serious had happened. He gestured outside, allowing his sister to see the bizarre metal construct he had fashioned. Stunned, Julian stared at the sight as her brother calmly explained that Sun Hyungu was now his prisoner. With their greatest obstacle contained, they only needed to wait for Yang Su to arrive. Right on cue, the East's finest driver appeared. But as Yang Su approached, the siblings froze. He was limping, clutching his head, drenched in sweat, and muttering about a pounding headache. The symptoms were unmistakable poisoning. Somehow, the enemy had reached him. His last clear memory was handing out food to survivors and hearing words of gratitude. Julian quickly spotted a tiny puncture wound on his finger, the likely method of delivery. The culprit must have pricked him under the guise of gratitude. For now, Yang-woo required rest and confinement within the subspace. He needed to be isolated until further notice. Young Hyan had not foreseen this outcome, and the weight of failing to protect his friend pressed heavily on him. Without understanding the mechanics of the poison, the situation risked spiraling into further danger. Their only hope lay in locating Jin Sung Hak swiftly to obtain a cure. To prepare, they secured the break room in Sector 1, sealing every window and door. Yet before Yang Su could step into the portal, the system flagged and blocked an unknown energy attempting to enter. Since subspace existed as a completely independent domain, such interference should have been impossible. Perplexed, Yang Su turned to Young Han for answers. At that moment, his pounding headache vanished the instant he touched a finger to the portal. To confirm their theory, they tested the method on the most severely afflicted victim, Si Hyung-woo. Young Hyan summoned a portal beneath the man's feet, pulling him inside against his will. Once in the subspace, the poison coursing through Hyungu's body dissolved. When Young Hyan withdrew access and returned him to the real world, Hyungu reappeared with clear eyes and a healthier complexion, as though waking from a deep sleep. The toxin had been purged completely. Young Hyan realized then that his subspace not only resisted physical attacks, but was impervious to psychological and chemical assaults as well. The first thing Hyungu did after regaining himself was to visit his ailing mother. He embraced her, apologizing for his long absence and urging her to rest more. He promised to return soon once important matters were resolved. Young Hyan asked if he would be safe on his own, and Hyungu reassured him with confidence. Ordinary attacks could no longer threaten him. Still, the bitter memory of being manipulated by Jin Seung-hak filled him with shame. Determined, he vowed to settle the matter with the mastermind before moving forward. Hyungu also swore to deal with the real cancer lingering in the hospital without delay. Meanwhile, Jin Seung-hak received unsettling news communication with one of his subordinates had been lost. Unease crept over him, and his fears were realized when the very person he least wished to see strode into his office. Si Hyungu, muscles tense with restrained fury, resisted the urge to tear him apart on sight. Jin Seung-hak, unaware of how their connection had been broken, wore a smug smile and begged for mercy. Hyungu answered with a brutal strike, driving his arm into the villain's head and silencing him forever. While he moved on to finish business upstairs, young Hyen and the others discussed how to free the remaining survivors from their dependence on the poison. Since they couldn't be sure who had been tainted, the most reliable plan was to have everyone pass through the portal. Even those too weak to walk could be cured by a mere touch. Though exhausting, it was the only certain method. But just as they prepared for the long ordeal, an unexpected miracle occurred. Survivors throughout the hospital suddenly behaved as though a great burden had been lifted. One after another, the afflicted regained clarity, freed from the poison's grip. The group was bewildered until Sun Hyungu appeared, blood smeared across his hands and clothing. His grim appearance made the explanation clear he had settled matters personally. He bowed his head and thanked Yoonji for saving the hospital. Yoonji, in return, expressed gratitude for Hyungu's decisive action in eliminating the root of their suffering. He also offered a light-hearted apology for the earlier incident with the bowling balls, relieved that Hyungu's resilience had spared him any serious harm. For all the monsters Hyungu had faced since the apocalypse began, nothing compared to the surreal experience of being trapped beneath those descending plates of Yoonji's power. When Hyungu asked if Yoonji intended to remain at the hospital, Yoonji seemed caught off guard. The large man admitted that it might be selfish to request more after all that had already been done, but the hospital would undoubtedly be safer with Yoonji around. However, Yoonji explained that his mission to reunite with his family had to take priority, and he would be leaving soon. Accepting this, Hyungu refrained from pressing further and wished him success in finding his loved ones. The conversation turned to family, and since Hyungu was from Iljiro, it became the perfect opportunity to ask about the situation in the city. Hyungu was taken aback when he learned the group intended to head there, warning them that reaching Iljiro was now impossible. Hours later, as dawn broke over the hospital, the survivors awoke to a sense of renewed hope. Thanks to Young Yang, they not only had enough food to last them for the foreseeable future, but also clothing, tools, and other essentials. Former enemies now stood together as allies. Hyungu shook Young Yang's hand, promising to repay his kindness someday. With that, the group departed from the hospital and set their course toward Iljiro. Mr. Yong-soo, now fully recovered, drove with his usual steady skill. During the ride, he brought up the wall Hyungu had mentioned surrounding Iljiro, speculating that it might have been created by someone's special ability. If that were the case, Young Yan hoped they could establish communication with the person responsible. Otherwise, forcing their way through might be the only option. The night before, Hyungu had described what he witnessed while leaving Iljiro. He recalled the wall erupting from the ground like a tooth pushing upward, growing until it reached the height of a skyscraper. Ground travel had become virtually impossible. He also spoke of the strange monsters within the city. Unlike Gangnam, Iljiro was plagued by undead creatures' skeletons that reanimated even after destruction, and corpses that roamed endlessly. Despite the dangers of Iljiro, Young Yang showed no worry for his sister Sail, who was still trapped inside. He trusted in her ability to survive, even without awakening any powers of her own. While in his subspace, Young Yang received a call from Julian, who had finally decided to join them now that the hospital was free of poison. When he lazily asked why she was calling, Big Sis quickly scolded him, demanding he speak with more respect. She then informed him that the soldier they had rescued had regained consciousness. Young Yang immediately entered the subspace, where the soldier offered heartfelt thanks for saving his life. The man introduced himself as Colonel Han Haing H. Ho of the 50th Intelligence Communications Battalion. Thanks to Julian's careful treatment, he had fully recovered. Looking around, the colonel appeared disoriented. Though he could see the military command center outside, the rest of his surroundings seemed unfamiliar. There were never supposed to be any buildings there, let alone a logistics center. Yang explained that they were inside the staff lounge of the PAX FC Logistics Center within his subspace. In reality, they were still in Gangnam, traveling toward Hanam Bridge. Struggling to grasp the concept, the colonel only began to understand when Julian clarified it more plainly. They were inside the boy's ability, based in Gangnam. Accepting this, the colonel politely requested to be dropped off along the road. Yang assured him they meant no harm and only wished to help. The colonel acknowledged their goodwill, admitting they had indeed saved his life. However, he made it clear that he could not disclose the details of his mission, which was to reach the Joint Chiefs of Staff as quickly as possible. Recognizing the national significance of the mission, Yang contacted PAX for support. Instead of sending the colonel on his way immediately, he first offered him banana milk and a sandwich, urging him to eat before continuing. At first, the colonel resisted, but when Yang presented an entire spread of pizza, waffles, chicken, and other food, the colonel could no longer refuse. As he ate, he began to share critical classified information. He explained that everything began when creatures from another world appeared simultaneously across the globe. These entities were not limited to monsters. They included insects, animals, plants, and even massive geographical features like mountains. They attacked without discrimination, targeting humans, animals, and even each other, sparing nothing and no one. In response, the government had started enlisting individuals known as the Awakened to form specialized units. These Awakened, wielding extraordinary abilities, proved highly effective in combating the creatures. Colonel Han's unit had been stationed near Gin and Enyang, where the situation had remained relatively stable. But then the beast appeared. He described how his men were mercilessly slaughtered by a colossal wyvern, devoured despite their best efforts. Conventional weapons, guns, grenades, even heavy artillery proved utterly useless against it. Though they desperately called for reinforcements, nearby units were already overwhelmed by their own battles against other powerful monsters. Strangely, they were still able to communicate with Gin and Enyang throughout the fighting, but no reports or directives ever came from command. Ultimately, Colonel Han made the difficult decision to retreat, choosing survival over certain annihilation at the hands of the wyverns. Their new destination became the National Communication Command. Yet, as the monsters pursued them relentlessly, more of his comrades fell along the way. Upon reaching a city, they tried to recruit additional awakened individuals to bolster their dwindling ranks. After many days of grueling travel, they finally arrived at the base camp only to find it completely deserted, just as expected. The reason for the abandonment became clear soon after. While searching the command center, they uncovered suspicious documents alluding to a coup. Signs of a rebellion were unmistakable. Colonel Han attempted to contact the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but their efforts were cut short when the wyverns cornered them at the base. To make matters worse, the very awakened recruits they had gathered turned against them, slaughtering the remaining soldiers and seizing control. These traitors were eventually devoured by the wyverns themselves. Han suspected the First Corps of intentionally undermining the government's regrouping efforts, likely siding with the rebellion. Amidst the chaos of an apocalypse, even a coup felt disturbingly ordinary. Since Yunji's group was already heading toward Yujiro, he reassured the colonel that they would drop him off when they crossed the Han River Bridge. Grateful, the colonel continued enjoying the gourmet meal before him. Yunji then instructed Yang-su to increase their speed slightly, though not to the maximum, given the urgency of their situation. As Colonel Han pondered, he realized the young man had likely faced the wyvern at the military base as well. Just as he began to wonder how Yunji had managed to escape such a persistent predator, his eyes widened in horror. A monstrous ogre was hammering furiously against the portal's barrier, desperate to break through. Yet Yoonji and Yang-soo remained utterly calm, treating the scene as if it were nothing unusual. While the colonel froze in fear, the rest of the group behaved as though it were just another routine encounter. Suddenly, a stack of heavy barbell plates shot from the portal, slamming into the ogre and sending it flying like a ragdoll. Blood splattered across the streets as the beast collapsed. The colonel stared in disbelief, while Yoonji and Yang-soo hardly flinched, clearly accustomed to such carnage. Colonel Han, meanwhile, had stopped mid-bite, struggling to process what he was witnessing. When Yoonji conjured a military vehicle out of thin air, Han nearly choked in shock. The pair exited the subspace, leaving the colonel behind with instructions to eat and rest. Yoonji left the portal open so he could monitor the road if he wished. The demonstration of power was staggering. Pillars of discs launched at impossible speeds, vehicles materializing from nowhere. Yoonji's ability was overwhelming. What once had been fearsome ogres were now reduced to trivial opponents, dispatched instantly by stacks of discs hurled with brutal efficiency. Colonel Han leaned forward, captivated by the massacre. He watched as magic stones from slain ogres were effortlessly absorbed into the subspace. At first, he doubted his own eyes, but the reality was undeniable. The portals were propelling objects at incredible velocity, obliterating monsters in seconds. Even more impressive, the discs could alter their trajectory mid-air, while the magic stones were collected automatically. It was clear to anyone observing. Yoonji's subspace ability was absurdly powerful when wielded with such mastery. Eventually, the group reached Bampo Bridge, only to find it completely destroyed by an unknown force. Yoonji apologized to the colonel, explaining that their journey would take longer as they sought an alternate crossing. Colonel Han, however, expressed only gratitude and chose to rest inside the subspace while they scouted for another route. Despite the detour and constant monster attacks, their progress was remarkable. They had reached Bampo Bridge from Gangnam in just 1 hour. Yoonji's ability certainly played a part, but much of the credit went to Yang-soo, whose driving skills were exceptional. Jang-soo, though often lighthearted, handled the vehicle with unmatched precision. Even from the passenger seat, his driving was dizzying to watch. When Colonel Han first experienced it, he was so shaken he nearly vomited in the back seat. It didn't take long for him to realize that remaining inside the subspace was the only way to avoid motion sickness. His evaluation of Jang Yum and Jang Soo was glowing. Both young men proved highly skilled and resourceful. After more driving and monster slaying, the group reached another bridge. This one looked worn and unstable, but at least it was still standing. Jang Soo believed he could drive across without issue, but Jang Yum grew cautious. He had noticed suspicious figures in the distance, and his instincts urged him to slow down. Upon closer observation, he noticed what appeared to be a colossal wall, most likely the fabled barrier of Yelro they had heard about. Its sheer size made it impossible to breach by car, since they were still too far away to determine whether there was any way through. The only sensible course of action was to move closer and assess the situation. Crossing the bridge would also take them through Yongan, which offered the chance to drop off Colonel Han along the way. After several minutes of uneventful driving, they arrived at the colonel's stop. Han expressed his gratitude for being safely escorted, even though it hadn't been their responsibility. Jang Yum wished him success in his urgent mission, and they went their separate ways. Meanwhile, Jang Yum's focus shifted back to his own priority, finding a way into Yolajiro, where his younger sister might still be. When they reached the fortress wall, it proved to be even taller and more formidable than expected. Jang Yum briefly considered whether reaching a high enough level to absorb the wall into subspace might be a last resort. Unfortunately, his current strength was nowhere near sufficient. He calculated that it would take at least 2 more hours of grinding collecting 400 magic stones per hour to strengthen his subspace abilities enough for such a feat. Han, in the meantime, suggested that Jang Yum and Jang Soo consider joining the government's efforts. The authorities were providing mana stones and resources to support newly awakened individuals, and Han believed the brothers' talent would guarantee them significant backing. Jang Yum declined with courtesy, explaining that his family remained his highest priority. As for gathering stones, he was confident in his own ability to hunt monsters and collect them without assistance. Though disappointed, Han respected his reasoning. Still, he mentioned that if they visited the Joint Chiefs of Staff headquarters, Jang Yum might reconsider, especially since helicopters were likely available there. His guess was correct. At headquarters, however, chaos reigned. News had arrived of Gin and Enyang's fall, along with the destruction of the 56th Division. Only the 1st Corps retained any semblance of strength. Amid such disarray, even the existence of an effective governing body was uncertain. Survivors among the military forces were left in the dark. The director, already overwhelmed with pessimism, was interrupted by a messenger announcing a visitor. Colonel Han, commander of the 50th Battalion of the National Communications Agency, had arrived to deliver a report in person. Han saluted crisply and then recounted, in painstaking detail, how his entire unit had been wiped out and how he managed to reach headquarters. He left nothing out, concluding with a document that provided undeniable proof of treachery within the 1st Corps. As the director read through the evidence, his stomach dropped. He had been completely oblivious to the rebellion festering beneath the chaos. Looking outside, he spotted the men who had accompanied Han to deliver the critical intelligence. Both he and the colonel hurried to thank Jang Yum and Jang Su for their service to the country. The director also acknowledged Jang Yum's abilities and addressed his request for a helicopter, though such assets carried great strategic importance. He agreed to provide one, but only on the condition that Jang Yum formally joined the military as an awakened operative. The government was desperate to restore order, and Jang Yum's power could change everything. Yet Jang Yum respectfully declined, once more affirming that rescuing his family was his foremost mission. Bound by protocol, the director withheld the helicopter. Jang Yum understood, wished him success in stabilizing the situation, and prepared to leave. The director, however, was left both puzzled and frustrated. He had miscalculated. He had assumed the young man would eventually yield, but he had underestimated Jang Yum's resolve. The refusal didn't mean the end of his options. If the helicopter plan to bypass the wall failed, Jang Yum was confident he would find another solution. After all, he hadn't yet conducted a thorough assessment of the fortress wall itself. With pride set aside, the director approached Jang Yum's vehicle and tapped on the window with a new proposal. If Jang Yum fulfilled this request, the military would grant him access to the helicopter he needed. Jang Yum accepted. Soon, an entire battalion was mobilized, military vehicles forming a single file line in preparation. Sitting in the vanguard, Jang Yum casually sipped from a juice box, appearing more bored than concerned, as though he weren't about to march into battle. Months earlier, the director had explained the mission. Seoul Station, once a hub for reserve awakened individuals, still maintained communication with survivors. The problem lay in the road to the station, which was completely overrun by skeletons. The skeletons themselves weren't especially dangerous in combat, but they were a constant nuisance. They swarmed in overwhelming numbers, difficult to handle, and nearly impossible to eliminate without destroying the core hidden at the base of their last right rib. Unless that core was crushed, the skeletons would simply regenerate. Jang Yum's task was to carve a path through the skeletal horde and rescue the stranded awakened individuals. Armed with his flying barbell discs, Jang Yum made short work of the mission. For him, it was a straightforward task, but for the soldiers witnessing his abilities for the first time, it was nothing short of astonishing. What they had dreaded for weeks was completed effortlessly by a single young man with an unusual gift. When they finally reached Seoul Station, the awakened survivors erupted in cheers, overjoyed at their rescue. The military quickly evacuated them into armored vehicles. Once everyone was accounted for, the director gave Jang Yum and Yang Su the order to withdraw. Thanks to Jang Yum's skill, the skeletons posed no real threat during the retreat. For the soldiers, fighting skeletons was grueling work. It demanded near-perfect precision to strike the cores with their weapons. Yet Jang Yum dispatched them with ease. Still, there was one adversary he had yet to face, a rare and formidable foe among the undead, the Skeleton Knight. The military had strict orders to avoid this creature at all costs. Engaging it was considered futile, as it was deemed indestructible. As usual, Jang Yum opened his portal and sent a barbell disc hurtling forward. But this time, the figure standing in the road was no ordinary skeleton. It was the Skeleton Knight. The imposing figure glared at the convoy, its hollow gaze fixed on them. To everyone's shock, the creature spoke in an unknown tongue. Though unintelligible, it was clear the knight was attempting communication. Then it plunged its sword into the earth, produced a magic stone, and crushed it in its skeletal hand, sprinkling the dust upon the ground. Suddenly, the knight's voice shifted into human language. He introduced himself as Sir Gain, one of the 12 knights serving the Night King, and greeted the humans as Otherworlders. Jang Yum, however, seemed more interested in the magic stone trick than in Gain himself. The knight remarked that it was unusual to be greeted by flying chunks of metal and asked if Jang Yum was a mage. He then questioned the humans' presence in skeleton territory, reminding them that even in chaos, etiquette in negotiation mattered. In response, Jang Yum flung another barbell disc. Gain slashed it apart with startling speed, warning that such attacks were pointless and incapable of damaging his armor. Jang Yum ignored the warning and launched another barrage. The knight rolled aside, stabbed his sword into the ground for leverage, and counterattacked with precision. Frustrated, he muttered about humans preferring violence over diplomacy. Unshaken, Jang Yum hurled 4 more stacked barbells. Gain deflected the first with his shield, dodged the second, and slashed the remaining 2 out of the air, halting them completely. His seamless maneuvers brought him dangerously close to the convoy. Yang Su, watching the terrifying knight close the distance, began to panic. Jang Yum, however, was more fascinated than afraid, marveling at how easily the knight cleaved through 500 kilograms of steel as though it were nothing. Yet he also noticed that Gain avoided taking direct hits. If I can land one solid blow, Jang Yum thought, we might have a chance. Determined, he gritted his teeth and spent 50 magic stones to unlock tracking delivery for greater precision. Testing it, he launched a single stack aimed directly at Gain's chest. The massive steel disc shot out of the portal like a cannonball, guided with pinpoint accuracy. Gain scoffed, mocking Jang Yum for relying on the same trick and calling him a fool by a mage standards. He boasted that he could evade any projectile hurled at him. But his confidence faltered when the disc suddenly adjusted midair, veering sharply to home in on his chest. The attack struck, though the knight absorbed much of the impact with his armor, batting the weapon away after the initial hit. "You're getting ahead of yourself, boy," Gain growled. "I was merely caught off guard. It won't happen again." But before he could finish his sentence, a bowling ball came hurtling out of nowhere, smashing into his head and knocking him to the ground. Gain recovered quickly, lifting his skull with newfound weariness. Yet before he could react, another bowling ball struck him square in the cranium, drawing out something he had not felt in centuries' fear. For the first time in ages, the Skeleton Knight froze, and that hesitation gave Jang Yum the chance to unleash a merciless barrage. Inside the car, Jang Yum barked commands like a gamer inputting cheat codes: left head, back head, crown, front head, right head, left head. Each call launched a bowling ball in a precise direction, creating an automated assault. Though his jaw ached from the rapid orders, Jang Yi refused to let up. The Skeleton Knight staggered under the ceaseless storm of projectiles, his frame beginning to crack. Jang Yi spotted fractures spreading across Gain's bones and seized the moment. He urged the military convoy to retreat while the knight remained staggered. But before they could withdraw, Gain's curses turned to pleading. Bone fragments shattered and scattered as the relentless strikes tore him apart. Sensing the end, Jang Yi commanded simultaneous disc attacks from every side left, right, front, and back. The coordinated strikes shattered the skeleton knight completely. Even in defeat, Gain retained his grim dignity. He praised Jang Yi as a remarkable mage and delivered a dire warning. This is not the end. Skeleton knights do not die. Even in death, we serve the Night King. As his body disintegrated, 3 magical shards clattered to the ground, a pair of large blue mana stones and a small red reinforcement shard. Jang Yi quickly secured them through his portal. The soldiers trailing behind were left speechless. They had just witnessed a young man defeat a skeleton knight, a monster impervious to tank shells with nothing but flying discs and bowling balls. At the rear, the survivors erupted into cheers, chanting Jang Yi's name. The unkillable knight had fallen, and their victory deserved celebration. Back at headquarters, the director listened to the report in stunned disbelief. He had explicitly ordered Jang Yang to avoid engaging the skeleton knight at all costs. Yet the young man had not only defied the order, but triumphed spectacularly. Despite his initial disapproval, the director recognized the importance of having Jang Yang and Yang Su on their side. Setting aside his pride, he all but begged them to join the military effort. But Jang Yang, steadfast in his resolve, politely declined. His quest to reunite with his family remained his top priority, leaving the military to wonder how they would proceed without him. Fortunately, the director was pragmatic. He chose to step back, though he left the offer open. He hoped that once Jang Yang achieved his personal mission, he might reconsider. For now, the armed forces already regarded him as an irreplaceable ally to the nation. The director kept his word, providing Jang Yang with the helicopter he had earned as a reward. Jang Yang, however, wasn't thrilled with the mounting expectations on his shoulders. The weight of their hopes pressed on him, another layer of pressure he hadn't asked for. Still, he understood their perspective. He had, after all, just brought down an unkillable knight that even tanks had failed to defeat. Yet the truth gnawed at him. His victory had been far from flawless. He had barely survived. If there had been even one more foe on Gain's level, the mission would have ended in disaster. Worse still, Gain had revealed there were 11 others like him. He had called himself one of the 12 knights. And then there was that ominous warning. Skeleton knights did not truly die. Even in death, they served the Night King. Jang Yi couldn't ignore the implications. If the knights were that strong, then their master had to be beyond terrifying. His arsenal needed rethinking. The pillar stacks, though powerful, had barely scratched Gain. Strangely enough, the bowling balls, illogical as they seemed, had managed to crack his near-impenetrable armor. But logic had long since abandoned this world. As they climbed to the helipad, the director asked whether Jang Yi truly intended to head for Yojiro. From headquarters, the high walls surrounding the city were clearly visible. The military had already sent a unit to investigate, but all contact had been lost. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed only one thing: people were still active inside. The director believed that among them might be Jang Yi's family. Jang Yang appreciated the director's optimism, though he felt a twinge of guilt. He had almost forgotten that his sister might be in danger. To be honest, he wasn't worried about her at all. That girl was more of a monster than anything he'd encountered since the apocalypse began. The director shared another peculiar observation. The top of the wall appeared to be growing and curving inward, as though it were forming a roof. While they couldn't estimate how long it would take for the structure to fully enclose, the director was relieved they could provide Jang Yang with a helicopter before it did. At last, after a long climb to the rooftop, they arrived at the helipad. Jang Yang's gaze landed on a battered, worn-out helicopter that looked like it had been plucked straight from a battlefield. Did I really go through all that trouble for this? He thought. Trying to convince himself it would suffice, he reasoned that as long as it could fly over the wall, it didn't matter how it looked. But the director quickly redirected his attention to the other side of the rooftop. There, parked at the far end, was a pristine, cutting-edge helicopter gleaming brilliantly under the fading sunlight. Jang Yang and Yang Su were momentarily stunned into silence. Meanwhile, the director allowed himself a smug smile, finally able to prove his usefulness. Yang Su burst into laughter, his excitement palpable. With his aviator sunglasses and Top Gun jacket, he now looked perfectly at home next to the sleek, powerful aircraft. Kim was equally taken aback. At the same time, the director began explaining something, but Yang Su interrupted with loud laughter. Turning to the director, Yang Su expressed how touched he was that the director was lending them a Black Hawk helicopter in such a desperate situation. He was already thrilled at the prospect of flying it. The director chuckled, remarking that he had been wondering who would pilot the Black Hawk, but it seemed Yang Su had prior experience with such aircraft. Before the director could finish, Yang Su interjected, "I've never flown a Black Hawk before." He then glanced at his system notification and explained that while he'd never flown a helicopter, he felt confident about piloting this one. As he inspected the Black Hawk, a notification appeared on his system. It stated that by using 50 magic stones, he could register the helicopter into his system, which would instantly transfer all the knowledge necessary to fly it directly into his mind. Excited, Yang Su enthusiastically shared this discovery with the group, explaining his unique ability, Best Driver. This skill allowed him to operate any vehicle effortlessly. Until now, he had believed his ability only worked with vehicles he'd already driven. But this moment revealed something new. Instead of leveling up his skill traditionally, Yang Su realized he could register new vehicles to his system individually. This revelation exhilarated him. Kim was equally amazed, and things began to fall into place. Reflecting on their countless battles together, Kim recalled how Yang Su's ability never seemed to evolve in a conventional sense. Now, it was clear his skill wasn't about progression, but about expanding his arsenal by registering new vehicles. The director then surprised them by retrieving a suitcase from the Black Hawk. Opening it, he revealed a collection of magic stones. Placing the suitcase before Kim, he explained that it contained 200 magic stones. Originally intended as a surprise for their journey, the director now offered the stones so Yang Su could register the Black Hawk immediately. Hearing this, both Kim and Yang Su expressed their deep gratitude. Without delay, Yang Su took 50 magic stones and began the registration process. As the process completed, a torrent of information flooded into Yang Su's mind about piloting the Black Hawk. His excitement surged, his grin growing wicked, almost as if he were possessed by some malevolent spirit. Kim, observing the transformation, felt a shiver run down his spine. With a devilish smirk, Yang Su declared, "I've got this bad boy all figured out." He urged Kim to board the helicopter quickly, claiming he couldn't wait to take off. Nervous about Yang Su's enthusiasm, Kim hesitated and cautiously asked if he could fly the helicopter at a slower pace. Maintaining his mischievous tone, Yang Su laughed. "Slow? I don't do slow." Moments later, he leapt into the pilot's seat, his excitement palpable. Kim, his eyes brimming with tears of apprehension, reluctantly strapped himself in, resigned to what he knew would be a chaotic ride. Like a mad scientist at work, Yang Su began pressing buttons and muttering to himself. Turning to Kim, he remarked that they still had some time before departure and suggested Kim prepare himself mentally. Accepting his fate, Kim shifted focus to the challenges ahead. He knew that once they entered the city, they would encounter more skeleton knights. To prepare, Kim checked his inventory to see how many magic stones he had. He needed them to upgrade his subspace level, hoping that doing so might unlock a new skill. Opening his inventory, he used 2 large mana stones and 1 enhancement stone. The system notified him that the large mana stones had been converted along with 200 regular mana stones, leaving him with a total of 1,393. Shocked by the sheer quantity, Kim used 1,000 mana stones to upgrade his subspace to level 3. The system informed him the upgrade would take several minutes. While waiting, Kim examined the enhancement stone. The system explained that enhancement stones carried unique properties and, unlike regular mana stones, could be consumed through the awakening system to grant specific enhancements to an item. The one in Kim's possession contained the fire property. Inspiration struck, he now had an idea of how to use it. The only question was, which item should he enhance? His two offensive weapons were the bowling ball and the iron pillars. But the iron pillars were easily cut down by the skeleton warriors. Only the bowling ball had proven effective. Choosing wisely, Kim decided to enhance the bowling ball. Upon doing so, it transformed into the fire bowling ball, surrounded by lava-like flames and imbued with two powerful abilities, penetration and ignite. Pax asked if Kim wanted to register the new weapon. Kim agreed, and once the registration was complete, Pax informed him it was time to depart. Kim tried to steel himself, but before he could, Yong-Su started the helicopter. As the Black Hawk lifted off, Kim grew anxious. The director saluted him, expressing hope that Kim would safely reunite with his family and eventually return to the team once his mission ended. Kim responded with a thumbs up, bidding the director farewell. At that moment, the system notified him that his subspace upgrade was complete. The upgrade unlocked new enhancements, including the ability to temporarily expand the shipping size limit for individual items using mana stones. As Kim reviewed his new skills, his eyes widened in shock. The director, observing from the ground, noticed Kim's stunned expression and began to worry. He reflected on the 200 mana stones and the helicopter he had provided, feeling he had already been more than generous. Yet Kim's reaction made him uneasy. Kim, however, was focused on his newly unlocked skill, the subspace laboratory. It provided a transportation function with a minor healing effect, allowing natural recovery within the lab. More importantly, it allowed him to register external objects into his subspace. The cost of registration would depend on the item's size, weight, and value. This was a game changer. Until now, Kim could only store pre-registered items from the Logitech Center or military base. With this new feature, his potential had expanded enormously. Still, the system clarified that all items must fall under one of the two categories. Kim's eyes shifted to the Black Hawk helicopter. Could it qualify as a military base item? He tested the idea, and the system confirmed registration would cost 107 mana stones. Kim agreed, and the process was completed. Meanwhile, the director was returning to the base when he suddenly heard the helicopter's rotors again. Turning, he saw Kim and Yong-Su flying back. Panic flickered with something wrong with the Black Hawk. Before he could act, a massive portal opened, and the Black Hawk helicopter fell through. Moments later, another portal appeared, releasing a second helicopter. Both landed before the stunned director. Kim smirked and waved before flying off again. The director stood speechless. He had given Kim an old, battered Black Hawk, only to somehow receive two brand new ones in return. His confusion quickly gave way to mounting unease. The scene shifted to Kim, who had now entered the city. A massive fortress looms ahead, its upper sections gradually closing in to form a roof. The fortress is on the verge of sealing itself entirely. The focus shifts, revealing a foreboding castle. Its dark and sinister interior radiates an evil aura. Sitting on an enormous throne is the Skeleton King, his skeletal visage illuminated ominously. In a chilling, clicking voice, the Skeleton King speaks. He admits that no matter how much he contemplates, he cannot comprehend one thing. The entry permit level for the Earth dimension is only Tier 8 at most. For higher tier beings like himself to enter, they must lower their tier just as he did. It is surprising to think that a wizard infamous for his arrogance would come here, even agreeing to a tier reduction. Even more shocking is that he dared to invade the Skeleton King's domain and kill Guan. The Skeleton King is referring to Kim. We learn that the Skeleton King comes from another dimension, while Earth is classified as an 8-tier dimension. To enter Earth, he had to significantly lower his power with the ultimate goal of conquering the planet. Now, the Skeleton King believes that Kim, who killed Guan, is also from another dimension, a wizard who reduced his tier to come to Earth with the same objective, to take control. To the Skeleton King's right, a purple flame begins to morph into the shape of a skull. It addresses him, explaining that before Guan's death, he had attempted to communicate with the wizard, but the wizard killed him before he could utter a word. This indicates that the wizard is incredibly dangerous. The flame advises the Skeleton King to kill the wizard on sight during their next encounter without attempting any conversation. The Skeleton King considers this carefully. He deduces that the wizard is here for one purpose, to take over the territory just like himself. But there cannot be two tigers in the same jungle. If the Skeleton King wants to claim this land, he must eliminate the wizard. He mentions that the harvest is nearly complete, and once it is finished, they will launch an assault on the wizard. The flame introduces itself as Lancelot, revealing that it is the spirit of a knight whose physical body exists elsewhere. Lancelot communicates with the Skeleton King through this magical flame. Lancelot then informs him of an intruder approaching the castle. Assuming it to be more of those bothersome minions, the Skeleton King dismisses the threat, claiming they will inevitably perish soon. The scene shifts to Kim and Yang-Su entering the city. A bat-like monster appears, but is instantly obliterated by Kim's Ignite bowling ball in a single powerful attack. Kim marvels at how much stronger the bowling ball is compared to the iron pillars. While he ponders this, Yang-Su interrupts, pointing out that it will be difficult to land because a skeleton knight is fighting a monster below. Kim looks down and spots another skeleton knight similar to the one he killed before, but this one wields a lance instead of a sword, like the kind knights used in ancient jousts. The skeleton knight enhances his lance with powerful magic and unleashes a devastating attack on his opponent. As the camera focuses, a human figure comes into view, a female silhouette. When Kim notices her, he reacts with a mixture of irritation and disbelief. The human channels magic into her fist, and with a single overwhelming punch sends the skeleton knight flying. The figure is fully revealed, a muscular and striking woman with an imposing presence. As the skeleton knight crashes from a great height, Yang-Su nervously suggests they might have to deal with both of these figures if they land now. Startled, Kim exclaims that one of them is his older sister. Shocked, Yang-Su asks which one. Kim clarifies that the one who just sent the skeleton knight flying is his sister. The fog clears, fully revealing Kim's sister, Sol. She stands confidently, her toned muscles and impressive physique drawing attention. Viewers might even call her a muscle queen. Clearly annoyed, Sol remarks that while she felt the full impact of her punch on the skeleton knight, the creature refuses to die no matter how many times she beats it senseless. Kim begins narrating Sol's backstory, referring to her as Sister Number 2. He explains that as a child, Sol discovered mixed martial arts by chance on TV and was immediately captivated. Luckily, she had a supportive younger brother. Whenever she watched martial arts matches, she would practice the techniques on Kim. But Sol's victories over weaker opponents left her unsatisfied. Her desire for greater challenges drove her to find tougher opponents at the local playground. There, she defeated anyone who dared to face her, boys, girls, even kids 3 years older. Recognizing her extraordinary talent, their father enrolled Sol in a mixed martial arts academy. Thus began her journey toward becoming a powerhouse of martial arts. This was the moment Sol encountered her first defeat, when her teacher bested her. But rather than feeling disheartened, Sol found the pain of losing exhilarating. At last, she had found a challenge worth her effort. Her new goal became defeating her teacher. Along the way, she achieved victory in multiple jiu-jitsu competitions. By the time she reached 7th grade, she had no equal in the junior division. Her intense passion for training and obsession with fitness drove her to constantly strive for perfection. However, this fixation soon spiraled into a dangerous addiction. Eventually, Sol sustained a serious injury, tearing the cruciate ligaments in both legs. Impatient with the recovery process, she resumed training prematurely, leading to further injuries. The cycle continued: injury, recovery, and relapse until she finally made her professional fighting debut at the age of 24. Her skill level could have allowed her to debut much earlier, but her stubbornness and repeated setbacks delayed her entry. Despite the late start, Seoul became so formidable that she easily ranked among Korea's top 10 fighters. Young-soo, hearing this, is dumbfounded. But Kim reassures him there's no need to be intimidated by Seoul, suggesting they land the helicopter slowly. However, Young-soo, still observing Seoul from afar, mutters that she looks more like a monster than a human. Meanwhile, the skeleton knight approaches Seoul, his sword in hand, and with a rattling voice, questions why his attacks are failing to connect. Seoul replies nonchalantly, "Isn't it obvious? Your movements are too slow." The skeleton knight counters, claiming his speed is no less than hers and accusing her of using some incomprehensible trick. Seoul chuckles and explains it's not a trick, but simply martial arts. She delivers the explanation so casually that it leaves the skeleton knight bewildered. Hearing this, the skeleton knight compliments Seoul, remarking that people like her are rare. He suggests that if Seoul were to raise her rank, she could become the greatest knight. Seoul, however, is unimpressed and confused, muttering about how all this talk of skeletons, knights, and rankings makes no sense. The skeleton knight continues, confessing that he's developed a deep admiration for her. He promises to speak to the Skeleton King to ensure she's the only one spared in the city. But before he can finish, a flaming bowling ball comes hurtling out of nowhere, smashing into him with a deafening crash and shattering his body into fragments. His remains scatter around Seoul. Moments later, the fiery bowling ball rolls to a stop at her feet. Puzzled, she wonders how this strange object managed to obliterate the skeleton knight when her martial arts couldn't. As she contemplates this, 2 large mana stones and an enhancement stone emerge from the knight's remains. The stones are swiftly drawn into a mysterious portal, which appears to be controlled by a device resembling a piece of corn. At the same time, a helicopter hovers overhead and slowly descends. Kim steps out with a smirk, greeting Seoul with a playful, well, long time no see." He teases her, saying, "As expected, you're still kicking asses." Sister number 2, Seoul stands frozen, mouth agape, stunned to see Kim after all this time. The scene shifts to a table laden with delicious food, fried rice, pizza, burgers, and an assortment of mouth-watering dishes. Jui and Kim sit silently watching in amazement as Seoul devours the food with feral intensity. Unable to contain her curiosity, Jui asks if Seoul uses some special ability to enhance her strength. Between enormous bites of chicken and pizza, Seoul casually responds that Jui is partly right and partly wrong. Her physical prowess, she explains, is natural and unrelated to the barrier. The barrier's sole purpose, she says, is to shield her from external attacks. She delivers this explanation as if it's no big deal. As Seoul continues eating voraciously, Jui's patience finally snaps. "Eat slower," she scolds, warning Seoul that she'll choke or get indigestion if she doesn't. Kim, observing the exchange, chuckles and tells Jui it's futile to argue. She's been eating like this since we were kids. Amid their playful banter, a warm, heartfelt conversation unfolds. Kim, smiling genuinely, tells his sisters how relieved he is that all 3 of them awakened survival-related abilities and managed to endure this long. Now, he has just one more task, to find their older brother. As Seoul ate, she glanced at Kim with skepticism and asked, "Everything's fine, but seriously, Kim, your ability feels like a cheat code. How are you even capable of all this?" Kim chuckled softly, replying, "It's a long story. I'll explain everything to you later, but for now, just eat and get some rest." He showed Seoul how to use the packs to order anything she needed and mentioned that young Sue's family was safe in the subspace. He suggested Seoul take a moment to say hello to them. Seoul agreed with a nod, but then asked, "Are we leaving the city right now? Are we really going?" Kim rose from his chair and answered, "Yes, we need to leave immediately." The city ceiling was closing at an alarming rate. and Kim wasn't sure if the fortress could shield the entire city. His tone was grave as he stressed the urgency he needed to gather as many mana stones as possible before the ceiling fully closed. Looking up, Kim felt dread. The ceiling had already sealed, plunging the city into darkness. Wasting no time, he boarded the Black Hawk, ascended into the sky, and launched 5 blazing fireballs at the fortress walls with all his strength. Yet, despite the ferocity of his attack, the fortress remained unscathed. Not even a scratch. A sinking feeling washed over him. He contemplated his options. Should he take the entire city into his subspace? The thought was tempting, but reckless. Moving such a massive structure could have unpredictable consequences. He had already exhausted his mana stones, expanding his portal's radius to 19.76 meters, just large enough to fit the Black Hawk. Now he had no resources left,